for 2023. We'll be doing these every 2 weeks, I believe, so keep your eye on the calendar. Go to the Academic Support Center to get these dates. They may be in other places at AU as well, in terms of where to find the information. So we're going to be covering all kinds of things. Today we're doing APA basics, just kind of the basics of formatting and citations. As the semester goes on, we'll be talking about plagiarism, using scholarly research, doing grammar, writing body paragraphs, using scholarly sources. So do sign up for all of these when they come available. They can be really helpful. We're also recording this, which means you'll be able to see it again if you really need to. But just make sure that you know that we are recording. And please keep your mics muted for the entire time. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat and kind of raise a hand or whatever. And then we will get to your questions. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick basic dive into APA. Can I see it, maybe the wavy hand, how many of you have never done APA before? So everybody has kind of done some APA. All right, so then this will just be a refresher for you. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Sorry, hang on one moment. Let me try that again. All right, one more time, sorry. All right, Mela, can you tell me, are you able to see my slide presentation?
Yes, yes, it's
okay.
all there.
All right, so APA 7, format basics. The first thing you might think about is the fact that we're calling it APA 7. So generally, all of the citation styles, they update every few years. So it should be fine now, but when they make their changes from one format to the other, it can be kind of a mess. So your professors may specify APA 7. That's what they should be doing now. So don't get too panicky when you hear that 7. It just means that that's the latest edition. So why do you need this tutorial? So always with citations, it's very important that you give credit for any sources that you use that are not your own. And by that, I'm very strict personally. Anything that I did not know off the top of my head, I tend to cite. And so I'm always a little bit worried about plagiarism. So APA is a really good tool for that. It's a really precise kind of a citation style. And you'll find that, especially if you, through high school, did MLA, APA is really what we prefer to use here. It tends to be used in social sciences, healthcare, business, other disciplines as well. And it focuses on the publication date of the source, as opposed to, if you remember in MLA, you're really just using the author and the page number. So overall, the formatting isn't that different than any other kind of paper, but you will have specific pieces that you might not have in an MLA paper. So the first thing you'll have is a title page. And it is basically formatted kind of just like the default setting. It's 1-inch margins. You want to use a 12-point font. And you will start your page number at page 1 on the title page. And that goes in the upper right-hand corner. You do not put your last name next to it. It just goes up there by itself. Following that, and usually in a template, you'll see an abstract. So an abstract is just a sort of summary of your paper. Generally, you will not need an abstract. So if you download a template and you see this abstract and your professor didn't say anything about an abstract, don't worry about it. This is just the sequence that the APA formatting uses. So you'll use a 12-point font. There's a couple you can choose from. The main components for the title, the main components for any kind of a APA paper would be the title page, an abstract if necessary, the body section, and the reference page. And then each of those has a bolded and centered title. So for your title page, you will center and bold the title about halfway down the page. I'm going to go back to that so you can see it. Do a double space down and put your name, the course number, and name, your professor's name, and then a date. When you're working on your titles, make them useful, but you don't have to kind of go on and on about it. So be concise, make sure that it basically characterizes what your paper is about. Anything else that you need in the title, if you're using variables, relationships, etc. Use the capitalization like you normally would in a title. And then here are some of the fonts you can use. Generally, people use Arial and Times New Roman. Always check with your professor. Your professor will probably specify what they're looking for. And then just a quick note, sometimes your professor will give you a template with a running head. Usually we don't need those on the student essays anymore unless your professor asks for it. All right, so your body of your paper basically is like anything else. It's 1-inch margins all around, page number at the top right-hand corner. You will put the title of your paper at the beginning of your essay, and then you'll go down from there. So you usually won't say introduction, you'll usually put the title there. And again, your professor may have very specific titles that they want you to use, so you'll always defer to them. Generally, you're going to be using major sections for most of your papers. That is bolded and centered. The whole paper is going to be double spaced. And I'm going to go down here 1 minute and show you the various headings. Generally, you will probably using the level 1, maybe level 2, rarely level 3 in terms of headings. So you don't have to worry about that too much. If you have a very, very long paper, you're working on a dissertation or something like that, you may have more levels, but otherwise, usually that bolded center level 1 headline is fine. So that's the body. The last thing that you will need is a separate references page. Oops, sorry. Separate references page. And I'll get into a little bit more detail with that. Couple of things you want to make sure of with your references page. First, it's references, even though you only have one reference. It will be bolded and centered, the word references at the top, and then you'll use a hanging indent. I have a quick kind of instructions for hanging indents towards the end of this presentation. That may or may not help you, but if you look up or just Google how to do hanging indents, it's actually fairly easy, and I'll go over that quickly. All right. This is a link to our Academic Support Center webpage for citing sources. And so I'm going to switch to that. Malik, let me know if that's working. Okay.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, there. All right. Are you seeing me in
Yes, the Academic Support Center page? Mm-hmm.
It is? Okay. So here are some resources that you can use. There is reference examples. There is the APA. These are both from APA Style itself, which is its own website. and Purdue OWL, which I've all probably heard of. Going down a little bit farther, there's an APA template that you can download and use, and also a student essay sample that can be really helpful, especially if you've got unusual citations that you need. A lot of them will be found in here, and this can be a really helpful resource. I would say for anything, I would bookmark Purdue OWL for yourself and bookmark apastyle.org. And I'll put those links up before we're done. All right. Malik, am I back to my regular presentation?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
All right. So part 2 is in-text citations. So you will always put in-text citations in your essays when you're using somebody else's information, their words, their ideas, text, whatever. So anytime you use a source, you will have a citation, whether you're paraphrasing or whether you're actually directly quoting your information. Now that's really important, because I think we have a tendency to think that if we paraphrase it, we don't need to cite it. You absolutely do need to cite it. There are a couple of ways to do the citations, and I will show you those further down here. But basically, you can do your citation within the sentence, and that's called a narrative citation, or you can do it in the parentheses at the end of a sentence, which I'm sure you've all seen. That's parenthetical. Basically, you're always looking for the name and the year of your source. And when you're going to be directly quoting, you also need the location of the information. And that would be either a page number or a paragraph number. So, for example, if you have 1 or 2 authors, it will be, this is a parenthetical, it will be the author's last name, comma, and a year. Always a year. You're going to always have a year near the name of your source. If you have 2 authors, you'll do the pink, ampersand, blue, and then comma 2019. So never forget your year. If you have 3 or more authors, you will do, in this case, orange, et al, period. Et al means among others. So what usually happens, especially in social sciences, they will have many, many authors, like up to 20 that you have to actually list. Actually, I think it's up to 19 you have to list if there's more than 21. But generally, as soon as you see 3 authors, this is how you'll do your in-text citation with the et al. It will always be et al, period, and then followed by the comma and the year. If you have a direct quote and you are using a paginated source, so if you're using a book, if you're using a journal article, even if it's online, they tend to have real page numbers, you will add the page number to your in-text citation. If you have a direct quote from a website, you have to count the paragraphs that it's in. Either way, you have to locate it specifically. So in this case, the particular direct quote is in paragraph 4. So literally, you will count all the paragraphs until you get to your direct quote. If you are in a situation where you have, I don't know, 35 paragraphs, you can still count them, but you could also maybe see if that particular web page maybe has headings or something else that you could use. Often you will be without the information you're looking for. You're working on a website especially, and you have no idea. There are no named authors. You have no idea who's writing this. There's no person writing it. You can use the name of an organization for your author name. So we call those corporate or group authors. You'll also see that with, like the Center for Disease Control or various kinds of government offices. Worst case scenario, if you just absolutely have nobody to use as an author, you can use the name of the piece that you're looking at. But generally, you can find some kind of author. What I would suggest for that is when you're working with a website, let's say it's a, oh, I don't know, usually the .orgs you can use the name of a .org. Look in their about section, and they will usually have some kind of information about who they are. So you can use that. Also on websites, you will, or other pieces actually, you will have no date. You cannot find a date anywhere. You don't want to use the date for the day. You don't want to use the date at the bottom that is their kind of website upkeep date. Just say n.d. for no date. And it's very common. So you'll find yourself doing it quite a bit, especially if you end up using a lot of websites. You may run into a secondary source or an indirect source. What that means is that you want to quote somebody, but they are quoting somebody else. So you've got your source, in this case it's Pink et al. Period 2014, and they are citing Blue from 1982. So you still want to give Blue credit, but you also want to talk about the source that you are taking this information from that's actually in your hands or in front of your eyes, or however you want to characterize it. So you will also run into that quite a bit, especially if you're working with scholarly journal articles. There will often be citations from other pieces that they're working with. When you have that, you will not use Blue in your references. You will only use the Pink. So here are some in-text citation examples. The first one is something that you probably, if you've been reading scholarly journal articles, you see according to all the time. So that according to is what we call a signal phrase. We know that when we see according to, in this case, Karmer, and it's followed, as you can see, by the year 1978, we know that that's a source. We know that you're using a source, and that can be very helpful for your reader to know that you're using a source, as opposed to kind of just using the source and not making it clear. So you want, as much as you can, you want to start citing that source right at the beginning of using it. You may use it for a paragraph, maybe for 3 or 4 sentences, and then switch. So you just want to be very careful that you're always making it clear that you're using a source. In this case, they quoted. So the according to 1978, that creates its own citation. If they weren't quoting, you wouldn't have to do anything else. But with this one, they have to put a page number. The blue one is your basic at the end of the sentence, citation, last name, and then the year of the source. The next one in red is Rutter et al. Period, and then the year that follows it. And that again is another way, right away we know in that sentence it's coming from somebody else. If you don't put that year next to the name, we don't know that it's from a source. So you want to always put that year in. Oops, and finally at the end, the yellow one is a use of that n.d. and also of a source that doesn't have any sort of author that we can name. All right, any questions so far? We good to go? Okay. So the last part of the formatted paper is the reference page. So that will always be separate. Unless your professor literally says, I don't need a reference, you will do references. It's very rare that they would, so just plan to use a reference page. And that is kind of the list of all of the citation sources that you used. And so these have to match up. If you used a source in your paper, then the source information is going to be on this reference page. It is alphabetical, so by the last name of the author, and I'll get to that in a second, the pieces that you want to look for. And so that means if you change something, you want to make sure that you always rearrange it so it's alphabetical. You also don't, if you don't use a source, so let's say you've gathered a bunch of sources and you wrote them into the reference page, and then you didn't end up using one, you want to make sure you take that out of your reference page. So if you've got a minimum, you want to make sure that you're using all of your references, and they just have to match up, because basically what will happen is that your reader will see your citation, and then they'll be able to go to the back of your paper, look at that reference page, and know everything they need to know about it, including if you've got a URL, they can actually look at your source, and that's a good thing for them. So lastly here, the name that you put into your in-text citation is the name that is the first, in that first slot of your reference. If you can, just because it can be a pain afterwards, try figuring out who that, that name is ahead of using the source in your paper, so it's a little bit easier to keep track of. If you're working with something and you love it and you really want to use the source, but you have no clue who is writing this, what the year is, any information about it, try writing that all down first before you actually put it into your paper. When you're looking at a reference, so let's say you've got your website, these are the 4 things you want to look for. You want to look for the author's name, and remember, it can be a group. So if your author is the CDC, it can be the CDC. Actually, you would say Centers for Disease Control. So that's spot number 1. So think of a reference in four pieces. The next thing is the date of publication, and that will either be a year or a year, month, date. And I apologize that there should be no comma between the month and the date, or n.g. So those are your options. The next component is the title of what you're looking at. If it's a web page, it's the title of the web page. If you're looking at a book, it's the book. If you're looking at an article, it's the article, etc. And then the last major component that you have to have is some sort of source. So a source can be a website, it can be a book publisher, it could be the journal name, it could be a newspaper. And this is just sort of, this is kind of the basic information. There's a little bit more, for example, to using a journal. And I'll show you an example of that. So there are a few little extra information bits you need to use. In addition, since most of what we're looking at is some kind of electronic, it's on the internet, and so that's where we're reading it, you will also add a DOI, which is a digital object identifier, and almost all scholarly journal articles have them now. You will use that DOI. You can use a URL for a web page. But if you are like an EBSCO at Aurora University and you're using that information, that URL, you don't want to use that. Go to the DOI, again, they almost all have it, and that way anybody can access that particular article. But if you use something from our databases, then somebody outside of the school will not be able to access it. So I would say these are the most common types of sources you're going to use. A book, that's kind of the old standby that certainly we all learned in MLA. So if you look at this, you can see that it's the last name and then followed by the initials. If there were several people, you would just keep listing those people up until, I believe it's 19 or 21. Hopefully you don't run into too many of those. In this case, this happens to be an editor, followed by the year, and then followed by the title. And one thing you'll notice about the title is that only the first words of each phrase in that title are capitalized. So unlike everything we've all been taught, in APA, your titles are lowercase except for those first words. And again, it can be very sort of off-putting when you see it. You feel like you're doing it wrong, but that is how you do it. And then that one is followed by the publication. Used to be you had to put a location for the publisher. That is no longer needed. Beware if you use a citation generating machine of some kind, it will often put the location of the publisher in. And that's kind of how we know that you've used a generator, which is fine. You know, you just got to make sure that you come back and check it against APA to make sure that you've got everything correct. The next type of source you'll run into over and over is the journal article. And I will just look at this first one with you. So you've got your author, you've got your year, you've got, in this case, you aren't going to be italicizing it because it's the name of an article, but you do have that kind of odd capitalization, followed by the journal name, and then you've got the 55-1 and the 66 to 79 are just volume number, issue number, page number. And then finally, this last link here is the DOI for that particular article, and it shouldn't change, which is why they did this, so that it wouldn't change if the URL breaks. The one you'll be using the most, however, is probably the website. So again, look for an author if you can find one, followed by the date, followed by the name of the article, and then followed by the source, which in this case is the CNN website. And then always follow those with a link. The one after that is American Psychological Association. Again, we don't have a named author, we just have the association, which is fine. But this one doesn't have a date, so don't worry about the date. You can look around on a web page and see what you can find, but usually if it's not up at the top, kind of in a byline, it's probably not there, and that's okay. So I'm going to talk through this quickly. I'm not sure how helpful this will be, but I thought I'd give it a try. So to format a hanging indent, especially if you've grown up maybe using an iPad at school, where you're really just pushing in the margin, you want to format your hanging indent if you can, because if you don't, and you are kind of moving your paper up and down, let's say, because you're trying to get the spacing right or something, it can tend to make the hanging indent kind of wonky. So there is a way to format it. If you highlight the reference, go into paragraph, whoops, sorry, I keep doing that. Sorry, go into the paragraph section in Word or in the format section in Google. You can, in Word, you will just kind of pull out the paragraphs and choose indent and spacing, and then choose the special hanging indent. For Google, you will go into Align and Indent, go to the bottom and choose the indentation options, and then where you see special indent, you will choose hanging and choose Apply. So just a kind of a recap, if you would like to come to us just to talk about APA, we are happy to talk to you just about APA. And in fact, you can probably do that in a half-an-hour appointment. So this is the link for my WC Online, which you probably used to make this appointment. I also suggest that you use APA style blog. This is really helpful, sometimes even more helpful than Purdue OWL because it's not quite as, I don't know, humongous. And then again, you can use our templates for our website, from our website, just to have. It's helpful to have. It probably has the formatting for the references all put in there as well, so that could be really helpful and save you some time. Other than that, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to go ahead and put some of these links in the chat so that you can access them. And if you've got any questions, we would love to answer them. We do nothing but talk about APA all day. Am I right?
Absolutely.